Wishing you a very good day. I should say that it's a pleasure and nice to meet you again through our Pehasara Aruna educational channel. Earlier in our revision lessons, we could explain some of your subject matters in the medium of Sinhala. Here I thought of discussing the same matter that we have discussed in the Sinhala medium. This is about the information processing model. This has been discussed by Mr. Savanathilaka under educational psychology subject earlier. So even though there isn't an urgent examination nearby, I think knowing this model would be very much beneficial to you all as teachers and at the same time as learners in the postgraduate unit. Right, here we go. This is our topic that I'm going to discuss with you all today. And along with this, I hope to recall your memory on what is cognition and what is metacognition in brief. Because this model refers under cognitive learning theory and mechanism explains with metacognition. We know how our brain works. And what is our brain? Actually, it is a physical organ. Physically, we can touch and see. But if I ask you, what is mind? It is somewhat abstract and imaginary, and we can't see or touch. Those things, those concepts that we can't see and touch, we call metaphysical. Metaphysical things. That means they are beyond what we can see. They are beyond what we can touch. So, it is clear now, this model is also a metaphysical imaginary thing that we can't observe, we can't see, and we can't touch even. There are no physical memory segments in the brain or mind or anywhere. So, as you all know by now, we learn three types of learning theories. Three main types of learning theories. They are behavioral learning theories, cognitive learning theories, and constructivist or social constructivist theories. This particular model comes under cognitive learning theory. So, many scientists have illustrated this theory in several models. This information processing model has been introduced by two scientists named William Atkinson and Richard Schifrin in 1968. They illustrated the human memory through this model. The information processing model. This model evolved through information processing theory. This information processing theory is the approach to the study of cognitive development in psychology. The developmental psychologists believed the maturational changes in basic components of a child's mind helps in their mental development. So, this theory says humans can process information. Humans can process what they receive from the outside rather than merely responding to those stimuli. So then they try to equate this process in mind to the process in the computer. So like in the computer, the mind is responsible for analyzing information from the environment. According to this standard information processing model for mental development, the mind's machinery includes attention mechanisms for bringing information in to the working memory. The working memory, which is similar to the central processing unit of the computer, can actively hold and manipulate information. So this working memory is actively holding and manipulating information. On the other hand, long-term memory, passively holding information. So this is similar to the hard disk of the computer, so that it can be used in the future purposes. This theory addresses how, as children grow, their brains likewise mature, leading to advances in their ability to process and respond to the information they received from the outside through their five senses. That means this is similar to the computer's input devices. We try to input those messages, commands and all to the computer. Sensory memory, or sometimes we call this as sensory register. This sensory memory is responsible for holding information that the mind receives through the senses. Some information we receive through our senses from the environment. So, there are different names to those 5 types of memory segments. We call auditory information which we receive through our ear, they are called echoic memory. And for the visual information we receive through our eyes as images are called iconic memory. Things we taste through our mouth and especially by our tongue are called gustatory memory. And haptic memory, that we touch and feel, and olfactory memory are called what we smell through our nose. So likewise, we have very strong and powerful senses. Through these senses, we receive information to our mind from the outside. For an example, if someone hears a bird chirp, he knows that it is a bird chirp because that information is held in the brief sensory memory earlier, because those schematic information have been developed in their memory and they retrieve when they see or hear or smell or feel whatever it is in the correct matter of moment. And as you can see, the capacity and duration of this sensory register or the sensory memory is very low. So first we will go through all these 3 memory types with a brief idea, and let's then go in deep. Right, then let's move on to the short-term memory, which we call as working memory as well. This memory lasts only for 30 seconds. So you can see that duration is also very, very low. But compared to sensory memory or the sensory register, that is somewhat higher. Short-term memory retains information that is needed for only a short period of time, such as remembering a phone number that needs to be dialed soon or so. This memory works getting back information from the long-term memory. And on the other hand, this memory is responsible for the information we get from the sensory memory with some kind of attention. We discussed this earlier. So then, as I told you earlier, let's go through these 3 memories fast. Now, what is long-term memory? It has an unlimited amount of space which we don't use almost effectively. We don't use this unlimited space effectively because we do not know well about this magical secret. What is the magical secret behind this long-term memory? It has an unlimited capacity and unlimited duration we can store our memory types, our memory. So in the long-term memory, memory is stored from the beginning of our lifetime. That means from our birth. Those are long-term and it says that it is permanent, most probably. This long-term memory is tapped into working memory when there is a need to recall an event that happened in an individual's previous experiences. That may be their life experience or sometimes a learning experience. So, as teachers, we always try to connect what we learn with our profession. That means with the classroom where we work in our teaching learning process. So, as teachers, what we should know the correct mechanisms to send information, that is what we teach them time to time, to keep in their minds permanently. That means we can teach them whatever we teach, we can teach them to send those information to their long-term memory and store them permanently in their memory. So we know that we have discussed earlier the long-term memory information is stored as schema, so they get perceptions and develop their own intuition how they should get information effectively in a way to keep in their minds a long time period, because this long term memory capacity is unlimited and duration is also very long. Let's have a look again to this model. As you can see, what we get primarily to our mind are called stimuli. These stimuli we get from the outside through our five senses. Those are external things. Those we receive from outside environment. The most prominent theories in cognitive psychology, they see attention, the term called attention, enabling and guiding the selection of incoming perceptual information in order to limit the external stimuli processed by our bounded cognitive system and to avoid overloading it. Attention is very important. In the normal condition, we have all five senses in work. So, we get numerous stimuli at a time. Sometimes we can't even control those things. But this attention, the term attention is the process or the thing that we can do that controlling thing. But we know we can retain only around 5 to 7 chunks of those at a time in the memory. Because the duration also very limited, that is around 3 seconds maximum. So what will happen to other information we get in massive amounts? Yes, what will happen? All of them decay from our sensory memory or the sensory register. What we get through attention is only retaining, all the other decaying. This memory decaying is called forgetting. Just we simply say forgetting. So that is very much important to know by us as teachers. Always we have to go back to our classrooms as teachers. What is our profession? We are teachers. This is the only way or mean to insert information, concepts, subject matters or anything to our students' minds. So what we should do is we have to minimize all the other stimuli that are not relevant and that are sometimes disturbing to our lessons, and the subject matter we are going to insert into their minds. So the students should pay their attention only on the subject matter we are trying to give them. The other important thing is we have very limited time period in our classrooms, in our school. So most of the cases within only about 30 to 40 minutes. So normally we set our classrooms, putting up the blackboard or the whiteboard to get enough lighting facility, and we set our students chairs in a way to get their attention maximum to the teacher, to the board, and to the lesson. In our government schools, we don't have that much facilities to have soundproof classrooms, but anyhow, we try our maximum to keep the other students in the neighboring classrooms silent and try to manage our classrooms to have minimum challenges to feed the lesson effectively. So, as teachers in our government schools, we do these things. It is a very hard thing. So likewise, we do numerous things to get students' attention and try to control unnecessary stimuli in the environment. But students do not try to ignore those certain types of exogenous stimuli in the outside. They try to pay their attention on those unnecessary things most probably. So it has become our own responsibility as teachers to control other exogenous stimuli in the environment. For an instance, in the case of ours, we normally find a calm and quiet place to do our assignments, don't we? So we take our books or assignments to the library. So that is a very calm and quiet place to read or study. So as you can see in the slide, the recognition and attention is so much important to send some valuable information from sensory memory to the working memory. In other words, the short-term memory. The student should receive the stimuli. That is, for an instance, what we show or what we tell to the students regarding our subject. They try to relate it with the shared information in their minds already, and they identify and recognize it. Or else, if we give them a totally new idea or a concept, we should give them in an effective way to pay their attention very well to that new information. So now you could hear I use the word attention, and earlier also I used it constantly. This is very much important as we do with the computer. What we do with the computer is we force or we command the system to save it or send it or to memorize it, to store it. That means to store the information we feed to the system through the input devices, we give those types of commands, copy, send, or store, like things like commands we give. So attention is same kind of command, I think. So you can understand this is done intentionally. We do it intentionally, but students normally they do not pay their attention. So it should be an intentional thing, and intentionally we should pay our attention. So intentionally we should get our students' attention. So attention is very much important, and grown-up students or learners like us, like adults, we know how we should keep our attention and what we should keep in mind, and what we should learn, and what we should forget or give up. Likewise, that is the phenomenon happens with metacognition, which I told you earlier, that is very complex to define, and only those who grew up can only get this concept, metacognition. That is very complex to define, but that is the place where we should take our students to. Self-learning, self-understanding, self-thinking, self-regulating, those types of higher order thinking skills, thinking abilities, competencies. Those are very higher thinking abilities which come under metacognition. So, as you know, to get our students' attention, we should use different different teaching techniques like multimedia presentations, demonstrations, visual presentations, and practicals, and many more things. I think you can understand these everything. Now, slowly let's move on to short-term memory to discuss in deep. Although this is very much important, first we should make sure whether we could able to feed the sensory register carefully. That means that is very much important to control by controlling all the stimuli in the environment, all those exogenous stimuli, and whether we could feed the sensory memory effectively. So we should pay our more attention on that. Right. Now the short-term memory. This short-term memory exists in between sensory register and long-term memory. So as you see and as you understood so far, the information the learner received through the sensory register, but not all the information, only the identified, recognized and attentively grasped information, will receive to the working or short-term memory. By now we know the capacity of working memory and the duration of it also very low. So most of the information decay even this stage. That is we commonly call forgetting. So in that case, rehearsal is very much important and we'll discuss about rehearsal later. By Atkinson and Shiffrin originally called this too as short-term memory, but today's modern researchers use the term working memory instead. But we can use both terms. This working memory is the place where students will process the content of our carefully crafted lessons, our instructions, as well as our warnings regarding everything. So it says that working memory is very, very important. And most of the people who have higher ranks, higher professions such as doctors, engineers, aircraft engineers and rocket scientists like people, they have a very powerful working memory. That is their work. That is the place where they work. And so it says this working memory with the scientists. In case of scientists, they do their experiments and get their exact results because of this working memory. This short-term memory or the working memory helps rocket scientists to do their moon landings to the correct timing and sending spacecrafts to a land precisely passing millions of miles away to the exact land they targeted likewise. So this working memory or the short-term memory is that much powerful and very important. But the pity is, in spite of all of its capabilities, working memory has very, very small space. So the point is, working memory is just too small for us to do everything we would like to be capable of doing. So with this limited capacity has profound implications for teaching and learning. Let us now consider how the students in our classrooms are affected. If we provide them with complicated instructions, there is likely minimal space remaining in working memory for them to comprehend the content. So, that is why we instruct our teachers normally during the teaching practice sessions, our instructors and our lecturers. They normally instruct the teachers to divide their lessons into small chunks. I mean, there are some lessons having very big subject matters, very bulk of subject matters. So we can, as teachers, we can divide those big lessons into small chunks and we can interpret them very clearly and carefully, which avoid making complications or doubts in the students' minds. So it is very easy to the teacher and the student as well to clarify all the matters and complex concepts as the teacher has to describe a little. So it is easy for the student even to memorize it and to process it. Likewise, if the pace of our instruction is also too fast, and if teacher's voice is not audible enough, there will be a little chance for our student to sufficiently process the information, and maybe even not enough opportunity for them to write it down for later study even. So it is very crucial to pay more attention on our way of presenting the information. That is very much important. If our way of presenting the information is good, they can meaningfully learn their subject matter. And the other important thing is, every time what we teach and how we teach should be interrelated with and should follow child's cognitive developmental stage. That means we should consider as teachers who learn educational psychology always, we should consider the stage of the child, the developmental stage, cognitive developmental stage of the learner. So here we can see some important words highlighted. These terms directly go with the concept of short-term memory. In the earlier slide I reminded, and you even saw, the word rehearsal. To avoid decaying or forgetting the information received to the short-term memory, we can practice or rehearse it over and over again. That is a kind of repetition, repeating the same information over and over in order to keep it active, in the student's working memory. I think you can remember earlier in an earlier slide I discussed this. In the working memory, the information is active, unlike in the long-term memory, that is passive. In the working memory, always we should help the student to keep their information active in the student's mind. For an instance, this is done when we summarize the lesson at the end, and sometimes even during the lesson also we do some repetitions, like some definitions we repeat and we ask the students even to repeat again. Another important way to rehearse is to connect the new information with previously learned information. This integration of old and new information has a dramatic impact on the memorability of the new learned information. Right, I think you can understand this now. After the short-term memory, information should send to the long-term memory in order to keep or store there for a long time. So we should know the techniques to follow to make our teaching effective and to become learners learning a meaningful one. So that these techniques are very much important to help the learner or the student for an effective learning. Learner himself understands these techniques later. That means when they grow up. That's why I told you earlier, this organizing of learning things logically, integrating with earlier memory and doing rehearsals, students will find their own ways to learn effectively later. That skill develops in their minds and can be described under metacognition. So that I think it's better to have a look on what is cognition first and what is metacognition next, briefly, before moving to long-term memory, because the mechanism of encoding and retrieving can be described in here. Again, let's refer to this model. This is very much important to understand clearly. As we discussed earlier, the information which is clearly defined, clearly and well organized, well planned and integrated with the prior knowledge, we can help the students to send them to their long-term memory effectively and permanently. That process is called encoding. The process of sending systematic information, processed information to the long-term memory from the working memory is called encoding. This process is called encoding. Likewise, the correct encoded systematic information can be stored there and can be uploaded when and where necessary by the mechanism which is called retrieving. This mechanism is called retrieve. That means to get back, to upload the stored, systematically stored, integrated with prior knowledge, stored information from the long-term memory to the short-term memory or the working memory is called retrieving. So always we have to consider our classroom. We have to connect these things with our teaching learning process. So as teachers, we can help the students to build up clear, undoubtful, systematic knowledge, learned information, concepts, phenomena in their minds permanent. Because the capacity there is infinite, unlimited. That's why we should practice summarizing. We do brainstorming to get the prior knowledge consequently. That is why we do revision lessons, assignments. That is why we ask students to create mind maps or concept maps by their own. For the same reason, we can give students more practical work. Problem-based learning tasks. We can expose them in their own learning environments so that they involve themselves actively and can get hands-on experience by themselves. So we allow them to discuss with the colleagues in a group, and there are more chances them to discuss with their colleagues and they learn more things collaboratively. To understand the nature of long-term memory, these principles are very much important to know. To summarize what we have discussed so far, by now we know information is processed in steps or stages. As humans, we have an interactive information processing system. The system or the processing is similar to a system inside the computer. There are 3 imaginary levels where information transfer from one to the other, and there are limits on how much information can be processed at each stage. So, as teachers what we should know is the mental developmental stage of the child first, and second, how to control the external environment, and third, how to do our lessons effectively in a manner to get the maximum out of it by the student. So likewise, if we know this mechanism and if we know this model, through these models and what we learn under the educational psychology as teachers, we can do much better than we did earlier. Then, as I promised you earlier, I'm going to touch some of the information regarding cognition and metacognition slightly with you. Right, cognition. What is cognition? This is not that much easy to define what is cognition. I believe you know a lot of these things about cognition by now. The most important thing is not just knowing the definitions of these complex concepts. We should have that ability or the competence to use those terms where necessary. So we are teachers. We involve normally in the teaching learning process. So we should know these definitions, and as well we should know how to cooperate with these terms in our profession. So simply, cognition is a mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding of things through thought, experience, and the senses. But this is massive and very difficult to understand, and we learn about it throughout the whole time during our psychology lessons, step by step, during our postgraduate education. There are theories developed even on this word, on this term. This is very complex. So, in short, this is a very complex process and very difficult to define. That is something like metaphysical thing. So again, cognition is a term referring to the mental process involved in gaining knowledge and comprehension. These cognitive processes include thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving. These are higher level functions of the brain and encompasses language, imagination, perception, and planning as well. So, as you heard, this cognition process refers much and depends on much on brain and brain capacity. Even though it is a metaphysical thing, it depends on our brain and mind. I think you all can remember in the beginning, I reminded your brain, our brain, as a physical thing which incorporates with the metaphysical concept called mind. Slowly, let's move from cognition to metacognition, which is very much connected with the metaphysical concept called mind. So this metacognition and cognition, both these terms are regarding with the relevant to this the metaphysical term called mind. Metacognition. So you can understand this is so much complex and more complex than defining cognition even, and abstract and beyond from our limits. So that is why we say it on top of everything. This is higher order thinking skill. We can simply say it as a cognition about cognition. Cognition about cognition. So you can understand how complex it is. So to say how much difficult to explain this concept, academic research across cultures still try to find further results to get better outcomes about this metacognition. Self-awareness is the most striking ability a person can ever possess. You know this. Metacognition also involves thinking about one's own thinking process and understands self by their own. That is called self-awareness. By that, he or she can think about own study skills, own memory capabilities, and get the ability to monitor learning. Their own learning, they can monitor. So, the person who has that metacognitive skills can understand how to regulate those processes and given information to maximize their learning. So that is called self-regulation. So they can regulate their learning abilities, their learning process by their own. That is called self-regulating. Self-regulation. Right. Among most of the pictures in the internet, I selected this picture because it shows clearly inside our brain where we can place cognition. I think you can see the term cognition defines on the darker surface, and metacognition is given in a cloud-like thing beyond the cognition, and it shows how it becomes even metaphysical. Now it clearly shows there is a outer very powerful zone which originates beyond our cognition and where most higher order thinking types pop up. So you can clearly understand this is a self-regulating system or mechanism. Normally we meet students in the school who don't have even cognition, who don't have even reached their cognitive levels. So they don't have that cognition in the sufficient levels other than metacognition. If a student has these skills to understand himself and his learning or understanding capabilities, the things that he already knows about a particular lesson or what places he should try to solve, where he will get stuck, or likewise, if he can understand himself, there are no problems and our teaching process will be so much easier. But the matter is, students or learners are not like that. So that has become our responsibility as teachers. So that as teachers, we should help them in this process. We can introduce them good strategies to memorize things. We can ask them to sketch their own mind maps. So by that, they and we also can understand the gaps in their knowledge. We can get a self-reflection, and even a student can get the self-reflection. By these types of systematic approaches, we can help students to reach their own perceptions, intuition, and to develop metacognition. So now I think you can understand, you can have a brief idea about metacognition, because this is very complex to define and very complex to understand. Even as I told you earlier, even most of the scientists also still doing researches to understand this well. So with the age, when they grow up, they can find their own self-concepts, self-awareness, self-regulation on their learning and their whole life as well. They can get that bigger or the complex, or they can understand themselves. So likewise, they develop their self-concepts. Self-awareness happens. So you can see in this slide, I've included some of the facts regarding again on metacognition. So you can leisurely read those facts by just simply pausing the video. And let's move on to the next slide. Right. Now I think things related to long-term memory have been already discussed. So you can see some additional information in the slide. Now you can just pause in this video and you can just read those things. Now we know why did we study, why did we discuss about this cognition and metacognition related to this long-term memory. And now we know how the information stored there in the long-term memory. And there are some special two terms regarding this long-term memory: encoding and retrieving. The information stored inside the long-term memory from that information going from the working memory to the long-term memory is called encoding, and to upload information from long-term memory to the working memory we call retrieve. The new knowledge we get is assimilated as schemata in an interrelated network associated with prior knowledge. This happens in the long-term memory. Even though we say this information in the long-term memory is permanent, there is a possibility to forget from there as well. So, less forgetting occurs among students who learn systematically and with a very good understanding, in a way as we were discussing so far. So, as teachers, we should always incorporate this knowledge with our classroom, with our profession, in the classroom, with our students. So as teachers, we can give more chances to the students to involve actively in the learning process when they are in the classroom. So by now, during our psychology lessons, we studied plenty of active learning mechanisms. Now you can remember those things. And we know about how we can get their maximum involvement in the learning process. So as teachers, we can help them in to remember those things very long in their memory. My dear teachers, we have come to the end of this session. So I would like to finish this with a nice quote of Albert Einstein, which will be very much useful for us as teachers. Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Thank you very much for being with us.